and then share my screen. Boom. You guys should have a full screen. Somebody please nod your head or tell me you do. Okay, Phyllis says we do. Perfect. That's what I wanted. So, yeah, color in photography, right? This is a presentation, or what started as a presentation I gave to our camera club a couple years ago, but it's kind of enhanced it a little bit. So hopefully you enjoy it. Again, stop me if you have any questions. Yeah, let's get to it. So, when I think of color images, my first thought is with flowers, especially as we get into tulip season here in Michigan. This isn't Michigan, this happens to be in Holland and Netherlands, but we're starting to get tulip season here as well. So it definitely makes me think of all the colors that are out there. Color makes me think of comparing yellow tulips against the blue sky, right? The complementary blue against the bright yellow. And with color, you can focus on single colors instead of that comparison. The great thing about color, and Brian Peterson was good at that, was that it just attracts the eye. Color always attracts the eye. Bright spots and color always do, and we'll talk about that more. Some colors attract the eye more than others, and again, we'll talk about that more later as to why that happens. Colors point the viewer to what you want them to see. Colors provide contrast. Color definitely sets the atmosphere of an image. This is again in Holland last year. In this case, the setting is a cooling sunset in Death Valley National Park, Mesquite Dunes. Or it could be a warming sunrise over the Cholla Cactus in Joshua Tree National Park. Toning an otherwise black and white image changes the mood. Cooler tones bring an industrial look to an image. Can bring an industrial look. But warmer tones bring a feeling of basking in the light, even though this was a chilly morning in Kenya a couple years ago. So this one's interesting. This dune in Namibia is all the same color sand, right? Every place in that dune is exactly the same color sand if you look at it up close. But the different light makes it look different. It changes it from a yellowish orange to a darker orange, almost brown. And then in the shaded area on the left, it's almost bluish, turns almost purple when you combine the bluish shadow light with the reddish dune. So kind of interesting what light can do depending on how it's shaded. And some photographers think that color is above all. That's probably why Brian liked this Barrio in Tucson so much. I don't recall, do you guys recall any black and white images he had? I don't recall any. There may have been one on Instagram, but he was
I've
definitely.
never known him to do black and white.
Yeah, I don't think
I,
he did.
occasionally in his webinars, he'd mention it or say, I wonder what this would look like as black and white. But he was, for all the years I knew him, he was a color man. Jerry?
Yeah, I mean, just this statement, right? Color first, content second. You can tell that's what he craves
Yeah,
color.
I
Yeah,
think he was a color man.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think of why he liked Tucson so much. So this was in Tucson too. It's kind of a minimalist image. I really like this long shadow, and I really wanted to include that bottle that looked like a beer bottle up in the drain that came from the roof of the building. But then that blue sky poked through too. I thought it was a nice contrast of color in a sort of in a minimalist image. Color can be used in portraits too, either in clothing, jewelry, highlights, backgrounds. These were images we took in Ethiopia a few years ago. This last woman here was selling gems and stones laid out on a cloth. But when we wanted to take her picture, there was all these slats of wood behind her with light filtering through. So we asked to use her cloth as a background for her portrait because it matched so well with her other attire. So with what she was wearing. So yeah, you can do what you want with color. So playing with color allows for creativity. This is some fancy lens add-ons I had, actually filter add-ons that I had, a prism filter that I had. And there's colors in the stars above us too. So if you expose the star trails right, you can get the different colors of the stars from blue to yellow to sort of a reddish color sometimes. And the streets have colors as well. This was out in Lone Tree, California. And there's colorful displays in the skies. Just think about all the work to get the chemistry to make these fireworks look right, right? And coordinate them together, both designing the fireworks itself and designing the show. All those colors have to work together. And color can make some really spectacular displays. This is here in Detroit from Windsor, Canada. Their fireworks, mutual fireworks for the Detroit River. And then finally, colors allow for creativity outside the norms. So you can do whatever you want with color. Yeah, this was just a fun, creative image that I did with a flamingo here from the Detroit Zoo. So, but let's pause the fun photos, get back to book learning. Here's some of the topics I'm going to cover. I like to understand how things work. So if I get a little too technical, just bear with me for a bit. There's a reason I'm giving background on something. But we'll hit most of the things in here, or we'll hit all of the things in here, hopefully. Hopefully it won't be too boring. So, okay. And now to talk about color, we have to start with black and white. Technically, black and white aren't colors. They're called achromats, the absence of color, but we have to start with them. Primary colors depend on the background of the color, either black or white. The pigments utilized change how the colors are mixed. With a white background, what are called subtractive color models are used. And they're subtractive because the more color you add, the more light is absorbed and the closer you get to black, basically. The darker the shades get as you add more colors. So red, yellow, blue is probably the color model we used for paints when we played around in grade school art class. I think it was grade school or middle school. Cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, or CMYK, where the K is black, is a subtractive color space as well, used by commercial printers to get the largest range of colors. They use the black ink because it's more efficient than combining all three of those colors, the primary colors for that color space anyway. So magenta, cyan, magenta, and yellow. On the other hand, there's additive colors, which use a black background and create whites by adding the primary colors, red, green, and blue together. So different colors, different background, right? This color space is used by the screens like the one you're watching or holding your hand. Also theater stages, it's RGB. As you add more light, the closer the color gets to white. So that's what's interesting about RGB. But notice how RGB and CMYK are opposites, right? And their secondary colors are the primary colors of the other. Or another way to say this is that red and cyan are opposites, magenta and green are opposites, and yellow and blue are opposites, right? So the additive color and the subtractive colors are really just opposites in the color scales. And we'll see more about that later. So why are these color spaces important? And you don't have to memorize this, but it's because the methods to change color in Photoshop are mostly based on the opposite color spaces, RGB and CMYK, so a little bit in HSL as well, which we'll talk about in a minute. So here they are, right? All different adjustments, and they all use that sort of basis for color adjustment. If you subtract red in an adjustment curve, you're adding cyan. If you add blue, you're subtracting yellow. If you subtract green, you're adding magenta. So that's why it's important to know how these colors work together. And in Lightroom, similarly, in Lightroom and Camera Raw, color adjustments are based on the whole color wheel or light temperature, a little bit with HSL too, but and either way, it's really important how to understand how these colors relate. But it's interesting how many different color spaces there are in some of these settings. So let's talk more about RGB color wheel. So what is a color wheel? Right, let's start there. Simply, a color wheel is just a way to show the relationship between colors. right? Could be RGB, could be CMYK, it could be green, yellow, blue, whatever, right? So it doesn't matter. It's just a color wheel just to show how the colors relate to each other. So with RGB, the primary colors are pure and cannot be created by mixing other colors. So these are the primary colors. That's why they're called primary colors. Secondary colors are made by mixing primary colors 50-50. And there's our friends again, right? Cyan, magenta, and yellow. So how do you make cyan an additive color model? With green and blue, put those together, right? Tertiary colors are made by mixing 50-50 ratios of primary and secondary colors, such as cyan and green that make turquoise. Other hues are made by mixing various ratios, so that you get a full color circle, right? This is kind of basic stuff, but harkens back to grade school, right? So these are the pure colors. Once you get all the pure colors or hues, mixing black and white into those hues, you get even more colors, right? So white makes it lighter, black makes it darker. We'll talk about that in a second. So let's talk more about that, right? So adding black and white to the pure colors. So pure color is selected by just choosing the hue. Sometimes it's called the chroma just to confuse things, but pure color itself, which is what we normally look at as the color wheel, you pick one of those, and then you can start mixing white into those, and you can tint something. If you mix gray into those pure colors, you get medium colors called a tone. If you mix black into different ratios of the pure colors, those darker colors are called a shade. These words probably aren't that important, but I just wanted you to be exposed to them a little bit. So mixing a hue with different ratios of black and white changes the saturation, right? So you go from pure color to black and white, 0 saturation on the right and 100% saturation on the left. And mixing, the relationship of black and white in mixing creates the brightness or value of a color, right? So adding more black will make lower brightness, and adding more white will add higher brightness. So kind of interesting how that works, right? Yeah. So here we are in the color picker for Photoshop. I'm not sure how many of you use Photoshop, but this is something that we use to pick colors that we're going to paint on a screen or on an object in the image. So you can see the effect of adding white or adding gray or adding black is right here in the color picker, right? You add white, you go to the left, add gray, you go to the lower left, add black, you go straight down and decrease the saturation. So here they are, right? Same as we just talked about. Hue, saturation, and brightness. Yeah, there's a variety of these color selections over here. This one's called hue, saturation, brightness, HSB. Below that is, yeah, and there they are, hue, saturation, and brightness. Right, so just like we saw on the previous slide. Below that is red, green, and blue. To the right, or below that is the hexadecimal color for the web. And to the right of that is CMYK, the printer's colors. There's also one called LAB, which we'll talk more about later. A is just the green-red value, and B is the blue-yellow value, what we would normally call temperature and tint in certain circles. So it's the same color mixing as the color, temperature, and tint that we use in the Lightroom. There it is. So usually we see the color wheel as a flat circle, but when you start taking that, adding whites and blacks to it, you start changing the luminance or bringing luminance into account. The full color wheel is really three-dimensional, right? The color we look at is just more or less the pure chroma or pure color. So this is the first time that we've seen black and white in that color wheel, is when we start taking in luminance as well. So if you look at that one slice of that three-dimensional wheel, this is just a selection of a single hue, right? Toward the center is the black, is the white at the top, going to black at the bottom. At the edges is the pure color, and in between are all the tints, tones, and shades. Kind of interesting, I thought. So hue is a single slice. Saturation goes from outward to, or inward to outward. So zero saturation in the middle, and then full saturation at the edge. And then brightness in the middle. Higher in the wheel is whiter or lighter, and lower is darker. So if we take away all of the saturation, just to show what the wheel looks like, you can see that each layer kind of turns into a value of gray, and they're all that same level of brightness on each layer, right? On how you go through. Kind of an interesting thing, even though they look different in here, which we'll talk about more later. So back to the color picker. If we go to the four corners, if I pick a corner in the upper left corner, that is, this happens to be hue 0, which is the H0 right here. Saturation is 0, and brightness is 100%, right? So it's basically full white. Upper right corner, the same hue, but now the saturation on the right is 100%. The brightness is still at 100%. If I go to the lower left, hue is still the same. Saturation and brightness are both at 0. Basically, you have black at this point. And then the lower right corner, saturation 100%, brightness at 0, because it's, again, pure black, but the hue is still the same. So you can see how those change. And they all change accordingly. The only one that doesn't, I'm just going to point this out real quick, is LAB, because luminance is not equal to brightness. So we'll talk about more about this later. So we see here luminance is 100%. Down in black, luminance is 0, luminance is 0. And then here, luminance is 61. A little bit different numbers than what we saw with the other color spaces. So, but I'll talk more about that in a minute. So now we have how big the color wheel is. We've got all the shades and tones and tints in there, all the way from saturation 0 to 100%. How do we choose a color? The color mood or atmosphere is determined by two things again, those same two things, saturation and brightness. Dark hues with low saturation and low brightness are perfect for background and shadow and accent colors, right? Think about the left side of that dune that I showed you. The darker colors that were in there, those accent colors. Taking it to the right and deepening saturation, again with low brightness, gives the color strength and it makes it bolder. Increasing the brightness with low saturation kind of makes for muted colors or pastel colors, which are kind of calming in comparison. They don't have that strength and vitality that the high saturation have. Increasing brightness with finally, turning the saturation brightness levels all the way up to 11, we get the most vibrant and bright colors that demand your attention. So look at how your eyes are drawn to these colors differently, right? Which order would you rank them for your attention? And can you feel that subdued mood of the darker colors and the excitement of the saturated colors? For me, it's upper right, upper left, lower left. You know, it's 1, 2, 3, 4 as far as how much it gathers my attention. But it's a little different for everybody. So what is the color mood? Again, bright, saturated, warm colors advance or demand high attention. Dark or pale colors, cool colors sometimes also recede and provide a supporting role. Again, here's a similar dune in Namibia. So the shaded side is a supporting role, but the sunny side is really demanding your attention. And that light hitting the tree, I think, is demanding your attention as well. So again, bright, vibrant colors advance, muted, subdued colors recede. It could be a flower photo. I think you're pulled to that center of that flower pretty well, and then maybe down to the droplets, the brighter areas, and then out to the redder areas, which demand your attention. For the railroad picture on the left, I think the lighter areas, the yellow building, the green wreath, those kind of demand your attention right away. Yeah, I think so. Could be anything. So again, bright colors advance, muted colors recede. The bright colors here of the backlit wings of this bird really demand your attention, I think. But also kind of mistake with this image is this bright in the trees, I think, is somewhat of a distraction because that demands your attention as well. Those are the kind of things you got to look for when composing an image. Are there things in the background that are competing with that subject you want to photograph? Turkey vulture. Yeah, couldn't remember the word. Next is hue. We're influenced by colors every day. We use them in our language every day. Green means go, go blue. Roll out the red carpet, the gray area. All these colors have meaning. And I'm sure there's tons of others, right? White lie, flying colors, true colors, rose colored glasses, out of the blue, in the red, green thumb. There's all kinds of things that we can use, that we use colors to talk about all the time. And that really gives it an influence with how the colors themselves are perceived. So photographers need to understand the influence of colors on an image. As we saw in the previous slide, bright saturated colors demand attention, whereas pale dark colors are less demanding, but also the color family affects us differently. Each color demands attention or provides a unique meaning to our brains. Red is exciting, right? Can mean love or danger. Blue is trustworthy and calming, which is why many logos are blue. Each color has meaning. Purple is an interesting one. That came from a certain clam in Morocco, so it was very rare. So that became a sign of royalty. That's when purple became a sign of royalty, was them deriving that color, the original dyes from those oysters. Interesting story from Morocco. So those on the left have heightened emotions, while on the right are much more calming. Another way to look at this is by color temperature, right? Where reds and oranges and yellows are warmer colors, blue, green, purple are cooler colors. Black and white and their gray mixtures are just more neutral, right in the middle, as are gray and brown, or green and brown. Different colors place different demands on our attention, but let's go back to black and white for a moment. Without color, how can a photographer draw the eye of the viewer? If you look at these three panels, each one draws your eye differently. Where does it draw your eye, right? I think the one on the left with the black background has more contrast at the top. It draws your eye up there. Oppositely, the one on the right draws your eye to the bottom where the highest contrast is. The one in the middle is both ends because of the middle range background that's behind it. So, contrast always draws the eye. The brightness is contrast. Yeah. But there's other kinds of contrast. We're just going to talk about three of them. Contrast, again, of hues, saturation, and luminance. Contrast of hues around the color wheel make the basis for color harmonies, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Contrast of saturation allows photographers to bring certain objects in the photograph into the foreground and create a sense of depth or volumetric depth. Low saturation contrast blends objects together, creating more harmony. So low saturation just creates more harmony. Excuse me. Contrast of brightness makes shapes stand out, which provides more space and objects and separates objects. Small graduations of value or brightness help create and soften contours, add detail to some surfaces. You'll see ripples, that sort of thing, with some graduations of how bright things are. And if the values of brightness of an image are close to another, this will cause the shapes to flatten out to one another, resulting in one that seems to blend or get a little bit muddy. So anyway, you may want to put your sunglasses on for the next slide, because I'm going to do brightness and luminance this time. Brightness and luminance are really two different things. I talked about with the LAB, right? Brightness is a measure of how much black or white is in a color, while luminance is the human perception of lightness in a color. It's a really important difference. So it's a measure of how a color is perceived in being bright or dark versus just pure adding white to a color, to a hue. So here I am starting with 100% saturation, 100% brightness with the brightest red I can make in this color space, right? The brightest one we can transmit in zoom. So if I go to the opposite side of the color wheel, here's the brightest green on the opposite side of the wheel. Still at 100% saturation and brightness, but they look very different, right? This is color contrast across the color wheel, right? Doesn't the green look brighter than the red? So this is luminance versus brightness. So luminance is the appearance that green is brighter than the red. even though it's technically not, right? It's as bright as the red in brightness. So if I take half of saturation away from the red, this is saturation contrast with the center panel, right? So different saturation values on these two levels of red. Still the same brightness again, even though the back one may seem a little dimmer, still the same brightness, but 50% less in saturation. And then if I decrease the brightness this time, still at 100% saturation, this is brightness contrast, right? So a little bit different than the saturation contrast. So you got all three here. You've got color contrast, saturation contrast, and brightness contrast. So I think you can kind of see how the bright colors advance. They feel like they're impinging on you a little bit, but the darker colors go to the background, recede a little bit. So, you know, again, which one deserves or which one demands the most attention? I think it's this bright green and then the bright red and then the pink in the middle and then the dark burgundy on the right, right? So just to prove that they all have the same luminance here, they are turned black and white, right? Same brightness, excuse me, same brightness, different luminances, but same brightness. So they all have the same brightness. They all are the same if you take the saturation away. But here's the original colors, and they look very different in luminance, right? So all the same brightness, but they look very different in luminance. I just thought this comparison was interesting. So this is a color checker. Different colors appeal to different eyes, but luminance is a different value. In this image, the one on the right has 0 saturation, right? I've just taken away the saturation to make it black and white. So the human eye has about 20 times more receptors for luminance than for color, for brightness, than for color. Eyes are less sensitive to blue, which we'll see about in a minute, less sensitive to blue compared to yellows, reds, and greens. Use your eyes when processing a photo, but also be aware of the differing impact of the different hues. All the values in this red circle are the same brightness, but look how the different luminance is on the left, right? So if I look at these colors, right, the luminance is completely different. This red appears a little brighter than this blue, but over here on the right, they appear to be the same value. So the same brightness. So kind of interesting, I think. So difference in perception, we're getting into the health class now. We're doing go back into grade school. Difference in perception is because of the way we see color and light. We have two different types of light sensitive structures, rods and cones. Cones are sensitive to color while rods are sensitive to light. But rods in human eye is much more sensitive to yellow, green, and red, so those colors appear brighter. I think I said that wrong. Cones are more sensitive to yellow, green, and red. Sorry about that. So only about 10% of our cones are blue receptors, so are blue receptors. So that's why blues don't have as much brightness with our eyes, because we just don't have as many sensors or many receptors to receive that blue color. Green and red are almost the same. Green's a little bit higher, but interesting that our eyes work on red, green, and blue, right? So kind of interesting how sensitive they are. And our eyes are more sensitive to warmer colors compared to cooler colors, right? More to the brighter yellows and oranges than to the blues. Rods are more sensitive. Nerves in the back of your eye, they're about 1,000 times more sensitive to brightness than the cones are. Really, we're mostly black and white animals. Now, it really helps with night vision, right? Having all those rods and having them be so sensitive. So. And then also each person does see colors differently, right? Unfortunately, some have reduced capability to differentiate colors. This is a color perception test in the lower right corner. I don't know what you see there. I'll give you a second to take a look. But top row, 7, 13, 6, bottom row, 8, 12, and 9. So if you passed, you passed. So another example of your lying eyes is a comparison between these two orange squares. So Does one look lighter than the other? Does one look darker? Depending on the background color, your eyes may perceive these colors a little bit differently. So if I connect the two, you'll see they're exactly the same color. You maybe would see actually a gradient here, but it's actually the same color when I put the slide together. But you may see a gradient going from bright to the right to darker on the left. So your brain does work on relative colors, not on absolute colors. Nearby colors will affect how a color is perceived. And I was just out in Utah and I was seeing some gray soil, but it was next to red. And I really wasn't sure if it was really gray or if I was seeing a green in there as well. It was really hard to tell because of the colors that surrounded it. So just for fun, there's a lot of tricks of color comparison by a guy named Akiyoshi Kitaoka, who is a professor of psychology at Ritsumeikan University in Kyoto, Japan. So this really looks like spirals of green, blue, and pink. But if I zoom in on the right, you'll see there is no blue, right? There is no blue. It's all orange, green, magenta. I'm sorry, yeah, blue, green, magenta. Green, magenta, and orange, no blue. So the one on the left makes it appear like there's a blue. Your eye is convinced it's a blue, but it isn't there. It's just the proximity of the other colors. And just another example right here, again, using nearby colors to affect how things look. The yellow squares have a red square in the middle. That red appears darker than the other squares, but they're actually all the same. So again, the background appearance of one color affects how another color looks. So if I zoom in on those and I flip them around, you'll see that those colors are, those orangish red colors are all exactly the same. And it's not just colors. In this one, both A and B on this checkerboard are exactly the same shade of gray. And if you look at this, because of the shadowing and the way they've presented it, it looks completely different. But if I put A and B beside each other, you'll see they're exactly the same color. So it's kind of surprising. And just one more. Again, Akiyoshi Kitaoka from Kyoto University. Interesting that this left face appears whitish, the right one appears blackish, but they are exactly the same luminance. They are exactly the same color. And your eye just doesn't believe it, right? But if I split them back and forth, you'll see you can't see a line between these two images anywhere. So there is no difference in the shade. Even though it looks like there's a gradient there, there is no gradient. It's actually pretty amazing, I think. He does some really interesting stuff. I'll send out a link to his some of his observations, shall we say, challenges. So I just thought that was interesting. And there's also games out there which can check your color perception. Games that'll say, you know, is my blue your blue? So you can check to see how your blue compares to other people in the world. There's some games out there that are interesting in that it'll show you a color. It'll give you a certain number of seconds to observe that color, and then you have to reproduce that color. It's really challenging. It's actually not as easy as it sounds, but they're kind of fun to play with. And of course, practice, you get better with it as well. But I'll send those out with the presentation to anybody who sends me an email. So moving on, let's go back to the color wheel and talk about color harmonies. I thought this quote was kind of appropriate. Colors are the friends of their neighbors and lovers of their opposites, which we'll see in a moment in color harmonies. So moving away from the brain teasers and games, color harmony is combining hues in a way that is pleasing to the eye. We do it every day, right? We do it in foods and clothing, accessories. We do it all the time, just how we arrange things. Monochromatic colors is basically one slice in the 3D color wheel. Monochromatic colors really simplify the image. They're calming. They add a base emotion to the image without the excitement of colors to contaminate that, as some people say. So not that monochromatic pictures aren't exciting, but It's a different kind of exciting. It's more about shape and form than it is about color. Analogous colors is one spoke and nearby spokes. Analogous colors are soothing and uplifting, kind of calming because they're all really work together really well. There's no very little contrast in analogous colors. Now we get into the contrast, right? Opposite sides of the wheel have high color contrast, but the colors really work together. And it can be anywhere around that wheel, right? Just turn that around. Complementary colors are completely on the opposite side of the wheels. So high color contrast, but the colors work together. And then something like sunset, for example, does have complementary colors. The yellow of sunset or orangish yellow of sunset and the blue sky really do work well together. Another one is called split complementary, where it's the combination of analogous and complementary, right? Where there's some nearby colors on one side and a dominating color on the other side, right? It's kind of a complementary, but you split the one into analogous colors. Oh, there we go. And then there's triadic colors, kind of equal space around the color wheel. It's kind of a dual complementary set. It really just kind of softens the contrast a little bit more. It's not as harsh as straight complementary. And then dual complementary set, again, softens the contrast. So both sides have the split complementary on opposite sides of the wheel. So there is a pattern here. Monochromatic and analogous are kind of low contrast images or low contrast color sets, whereas the others are kind of high color contrast, right? They're more challenging to the eye, more exciting to the eye. When your image has more than one dominating color, reduce the saturation or brightness in others. So you could have one dominating color, but to reduce the contrast and brightness with the other, just to make them work together better. Muted colors work better in equal amounts than pure saturated colors. And you can experiment with different levels of saturation and lightness in each color to create an image with more depth. So as we've seen, the visual impact is always more obvious in bright values than with dark values. And of course, you can't forget black and white as colors. Remember, that's that hub, the center of the color wheel, right? And black and white is an absence of color. It's actually called achromatic, not just monochromatic. So black and white is monochromatic, but not everything is achromatic. So it's just a variation in the monochromatic harmony. So let's take a look at some pictures, some more pictures, enough of the book learning, right? This is a free website that Adobe has. It's called color.adobe.com. It's a free website where you can check colors, and it'll give you a color wheel based on your images. So what you do with this is you drag and drop a image into the web page, and then once you have the image in, you'll see this color palette at the bottom of the image, right? We're under the extract theme page. Then you can change over to the color wheel, right? This button right here, and it'll show you the color wheel for that image as well as that color palette. So it's kind of interesting to see where the images lie as far as the color theory, color harmonies, I should say. So if we start dropping images into this, here's one image, black and white, obviously, Chicago. So here's the color palette and the color wheel from color.adobe.com. You can see it's all in the center of the color wheel. So that tells me it's an achromatic image, right? It's a black and white image. So where does it fit in the color harmony? It's achromatic, right? It's straightforward. Here's one from Kenya. Drop it in there. And it's got basically, almost the same. They're almost overlapping colors. I would call this monochromatic as well. So not black and white, not achromatic, but monochromatic. It's almost the same color. Very close to almost all the same color. As close as I could get. Here's the one that's analogous, right? So all the colors work together. Not a whole lot of color contrast. There's some lightness and darkness contrast, but not a lot of color contrast. Yeah, so a difference between the advancing colors in the middle and the receding colors at the edge help keep the eye toward the middle. Come on. So here's another one, right? Just drop this one in. It's just a simple image of people climbing a dune, again, in Namibia. Just basically the two colors, but they're opposite sides of the wheel, right? So they're complementary, completely opposite side of the wheel. Here's another one, a grackle with yellow eyes, blue body, a little bit of purple in it, some green on the trees, some grays, a little bit of everything here. This one I call split complementary. Like there's a split between the yellow and the dark colors, the kind of brownish orange colors, and the blue of the bird itself. And here's the one we saw at the beginning, right? This one's kind of that triadic, where the colors are going through different directions on the color wheel. Not exactly, but fairly close. It's kind of hard to have pure colors when you're out in the real world. Yeah, so this one I would call triadic, or pretty close. Here's one in Chicago, obviously, that was split complementary, so two different complementaries on opposite sides of the wheel, or dual complementary, not split, dual. And here's another one where they're all just sort of ganged together, right? Very little color contrast. Yeah, I think this one's just complementary colors. Right, there's nothing really providing a high contrast in color, contrast in lightness value and luminance, but not a lot in color. Same with this one too. They're all kind of ganged up together, really just complementary colors or analogous colors. I keep saying that wrong. Another split complementary, or fairly close to split complementary, right? Two split sides on opposite sides of the wheel. Again, analogous colors. Analogous colors, but a much wider range of colors. So you get a lot more color contrast in this one than the previous image. And kind of a split complementary or dual complementary somewhere in there, right? So opposing colors, but a little bit of softness in there as well. Dominant blue colors, lots of blue. Yeah, and the lighter colors kind of draw your eye to the Statue of Liberty. Moving on to color balance. Color balance just adjusts the image for the color of the light that illuminates the scene. So it could be light from the sun, or it could be artificial light, or it could be reflected light. It's just the light that's being provided, right? So it could be light directly from the sun, or it could be bouncing off leaves or bouncing off the grass or something, bouncing off a shade or something. And some photographers will actually use a color checker card based on the light that they're working with, especially like inside buildings or sets. Because inside buildings, sometimes you don't know what the color temperature of the lights that they're using. It could be a really warm light, or it could be a cool light. So it really affects the skin tones of a subject or a model based on the light color that's illuminating the scene. So if you know these colors on a color checker, you take a picture of them, you know what they're supposed to be, you can adjust for those later on in your image. And if you've ever played with Kelvin numbers in your white balance, maybe in your camera or even in your editing software, here's what they're based on. And notice how the colors are actually opposite. The hotter colors are actually lower numbers in Kelvin, whereas the cooler, what we call cooler colors, are actually higher in Kelvin. Um, it's opposite because of the way we perceive these colors and the way we've talk about these colors. You know, blue we say is cool. That's just a perception, right? Whereas red we say is warmer. But in all actuality, if something is red hot versus something that's white hot, white's going to be a lot hotter. And if something's blue hot, it's going to be much, much hotter, right? So the blue hot is up here at 10,000 Kelvin. The whitish is around 5,500 Kelvin. And then this lower warmer, quote unquote, warmer area is about 1,000 Kelvin. So kind of interesting, I think, that it's actually a backwards scale than what the reality is. And color balance is based on color temperature is, is color balance is based on color temperature and a tint of green or magenta. So there's that LAB color space again, right? Luminance, A and B value. A is tint and B is temperature. So it just expands the entire covers color space. So vertically is still the Kelvin scale, but just expands it to be all colors. So let's talk a little bit about color correction. I took this picture of a barn owl at the local raptor center up in Ontario, Canada. So one thing that's wrong with this owl is its wings look green, right? When I took this picture, its white wings look green. So where did that green come from, right? I was wondering that. But then I looked at some of the other pictures, and that green is just coming from the grass. So the light is coming down to the grass, being reflected up to the bird, and that light that's now reflecting off the bird to my camera is now green light. So the white wing of the bird is reflecting the green light from the carpet of grass. So kind of interesting, right? This is one of those situations where light can come from different directions, can be reflected off surfaces, and just provides different colors. Some of them are unacceptable. I don't want a green bird. I don't want a green barn owl, right? It just doesn't look right. It doesn't look accurate. So I made some changes in Lightroom and just removed that green, right? Remove the green from the wings. And I just did this by changing the hue, changing the green hue to a warmer color. So it just kind of negated that green, so that it was kind of invisible. Finally, we'll talk about color grading. There's a lot of words here, and I'll let you read through them if you wish on the video. Later on, I'm not going to go through them all, but the key point here is just to experiment and to play with an image's color. There's no formula. Just do what you like. Do what you are inspired to do to create color and play with color. So if you want to put the slider to the left and the book says take it to the right, take it to the left. See what it does. Take it both directions. See which one you like better. So I like to say that a lot when I'm editing images is you're always best to start playing with things. When you start playing with things, you get really creative. You start acting like a child and start getting really creative and really open to ideas. So do what you like. Do what you like. You can also go to a local museum and look at paintings. There you're going to see saturated, vibrant, contrasting colors in the faces of the portraits. So saturated colors increase tension, which leads the viewer eyes to those areas of interest. Neutral colors of brown and gray can give a calm, tranquil look to your image, as well as a place for the eyes to rest. Subtle undertone in the shadows can also create a less demanding and restful color. So my eye in this image are taken to the left, right? This color contrast of the green and the kind of pinkish color here, right? These colors here, my eye is drawn there. It's drawn down to this white because it's the brightest place in the image, and the same with these people too, right? My eye is drawn there. One of the key subjects in this image, which happens to be death, is kind of darker in here, which makes sense that it's death, but my eye is not drawn there as well. It's drawn to places like this guy going to war on the right. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So definitely painting at your local museum, you can study how the masters have contributed light, how they've worked with light and color together to draw your eye around the image. So a couple of color correction ideas or color correction examples, I guess I should say. So the image on the left has a split complementary appearance to it. There's a little bit of a bluish tint in the marble between these windows. And I didn't like that, right? I thought it was distracting. The blue color didn't make sense there. I didn't like that conflict. I wanted it to be more of a calming image. So I just removed that blue on the right-hand image, right? And I get more of a complementary colors, less of a complementary colors, um, just analogous colors. This one's the opposite, right? I wanted there to be conflict. These two, I forget what they are. Animals are going at it with each other, ready to butt heads. But I wanted more antagonism, right? More tension between the two colors. So I went to colors that were farther apart. Kind of the yellow color kind of blended, they kind of blended in with the yellow color. But a green field, I think there's a little more color contrast. So the antagonism is a little bit higher. So I submitted this image on the left to Brian Peterson in an image review, and he said he loved it. This happened to be in Namibia again. But then he stepped back and said, but I don't like the teal color of the sky. And he was exactly right. I adjusted the sky to be a little more complementary, a little more directly across, right? Split complementary maybe. And it really made all the difference. A really darker blue sky, I think, made all the difference with the color contrast of these two. This lighter sky, I don't think really showed that tension between the two geckos as much. On the other hand, here's two images that are both complementary. On the right-hand image, I tried to make the colors exactly opposite, but I just made the sand all yellow, which I don't like, right? I prefer the red sand on the left more. And it just shows you there's no formula for color theory. It's really about what pleases your eye, right? So in this one of the rhino, I thought this blue haze in the background kind of distracted from the image. So because it was a conflict, it just drew your eye up to this contrast up here. So I took it out, right, to have more of a almost monochromatic image, going from gray to green. Green and yellow. But I think removing that blue keeps your eye more on the subject, which is the rhino, not the background blue haze. And this one's more about saturation, right? This is more of a triadic color. Image on the left is somewhat lifeless, right? The sky is sort of a pastel. The building is sort of pastel, all kind of weather worn and faded. Even the grass, I don't think I got the right color on that as well. Yeah, it's just kind of lifeless. Reducing the shading of those colors provides a real vibrancy to the green grass and the red barn and the blue sky. So this one too, I deepened the blue sky a little bit just to increase the tension in the image, right? Just a little more tension. Less sort of a greenish sky on the left, but it really added, I think, to the image. So two shots of New York City just taken moments apart. Rainstorm had just passed through. I took the image on the right. Really warm colors, lots of color contrast, a lot of brightness contrast. Image on the left is more clouds had moved in right at sunset. The sun had gone down almost, was starting to go down. But really a difference in color palette to work with from almost the same scene. It's really kind of interesting, I think, how much different those colors look when the bright sunlight hits it versus the shadow. So sand dunes again at Death Valley National Park. The image on the left is just after sunset, so you get the warmer tones in the sky, cooler colors on the sand, and then the right image is cooler tones in the sky during blue hour. So they kind of work together more. It's kind of more calming on the right, I think, than the one on the left. The left has a little bit of tension because of the opposing colors on the color wheel. And this one we saw before, um, when I talked about color attracting your eye. So here's a before and after of how I processed this image of this cemetery statue in Savannah. Taken in full daylight, but I just wanted that feeling of solemnity and darkness to focus on that red flower. Image on the right is really what I saw in my mind's eye when I saw this scene, with the Spanish moss dangling down and that pink camellia in the bowl of the statue. I think it's kind of subtle editing, but I think it works pretty well. And then one of the things I talk about in my composition class is shoot what you want it to feel like, right? So you may shoot an image in bright daylight, just like that statue, just like this allium plant on the left, right? But the one on the right is kind of the feeling that I wanted, right? So I darkened the background and just focused more on the flower. So the darkening background on the right makes it kind of recede from your eye, whereas the plant advances more toward you. The one on the left, the background competes with the flower because they're both pretty much the same brightness value, same luminance as well, maybe a little bit more with the blue. So that black background really helps create the mood, help change the mood. Color grading, I'm not going to, again, not talk to everything about this slide. You can read this later, but basically the gist of this one is do the brightness contrast first when color grading, then do the color contrast, then draw the eye with selective saturation. So 3 different levels when you're working on an image. And again, you know, it's your image, so you're the painter, create it the way you want to create it. And then finally, I want to talk about our devices and what colors they can show. This is yet another color space. I don't really understand this color space, but I understand the intent of it. The human eye sees between 1 and 10 million colors, depending on who you believe. So this is kind of a 2D representation of what the eye can see. Again, without that luminosity, right? Without that third dimension of bright and dark. So the range of colors that is supported by your eye or any device really is called a gamut. It's a range of colors, right? So this is the gamut for typical human eyes. In contrast, RGB or RGB color space is what's commonly used for webs or printing shops or the screen in front of you, right? So RGB color space is actually much smaller than what the human eye can see. So the devices that we hold every day can't hold all the colors that we can see. So this triangle right here kind of shows the limits. Now, if you look beyond this right here, there's really no difference, right? Why is there no difference? Well, it's because these devices we have can't show that difference, right? It's beyond their level of capability. Anything within here is within their level of capability. Outside of it, can't do it, right? So it almost looks like the same color once you get outside the triangle. Another color space is one that's called DCI P3. My monitors are all DCI P3, but the web is all sRGB. So I have more colors available in my monitor, but when I look at a web page, I'm still only getting the smaller triangle, right? sRGB. So it's kind of interesting, right? You get more capable devices, but if they're not being transmitted to those color spaces, then we can't really see them. So all different monitors have different percentage of how much they can meet of a certain gamut, right? So another gamut you may have heard of is Adobe RGB. So it's this larger blue line, a little bit larger area. But remember, right, the devices you're looking at can only look at them right here, right? So even though Adobe RGB has a larger color space, you're limited by the devices that we have. So, and still doesn't cover the entire visible gamut. PhotoPro was developed in about 2000. by Kodak as a transition from print film to digital scanning. It's the largest gamut we have in everyday use. But remember, most displays can't reproduce it. So it's a larger gamut. It's actually beyond what the eye can see. But the devices we have today just can't show it. So, and then lastly, this kind of home plate house shape thing is the CMYK color space that printers use. Again, it's very small in compared to the gamut that human eye can see, right? So there's actually limits on printing on what you can print. Any color you send to the printer that's beyond this color will come back and be this color, right? Unless you've got some interpretation software. So if you send colors that are brighter green than this, it'll still come back as that green because that's all the printers can do. So best if you can convert your colors back to CMYK color or maybe RGB. They're fairly close. Some printers prefer RGB. So printing is just limited by the availability of colors in the gamut, right? So all these gamuts don't define, all these gamuts don't define the number of colors. They just define the size of the color space, right? The playground, not how much playground equipment's in it. So they're all different, but different ranges, right? They're all different ranges, but the same number of colors, same availability of colors. Let's talk about bit depth real quick, right? So when you're working in Photoshop, it'll ask you, or Lightroom, it'll ask you 8-bit or 16-bit. People will go to 16-bit and say that's a better thing because it's more colors. But here, remember, the human eye only sees about 10 million colors. So 8-bit is perfectly fine, right? The 8 box of crayons is just fine. You really don't need 16-bit. You don't need 28 trillion colors, 281 trillion colors. So you get a little bit of shading maybe, but that's about it. And then one word of warning, be sure you do calibrate your monitor or whatever device you're looking at. You don't want to be wrong 16.8 million times. So pretty technical. This is kind of the most advanced part of it, but it also happens to be the last slide. So one word of warning, beware of color theories. Theories in color photography are dangerous, just like any theories in photography, to be honest. The plain fact that there are so many theories proves my point that color theories are dangerous. And finally, just a shameless plug, I do have some workshops coming up. We're going to Palouse here in June, over to Pittsburgh to watch the fireworks in July. Newfoundland sold out. I've still got 3 spots in Kodiak. I still got about 4 spots left in the Kalispell, Fall Foxes and Animals. I've got spots in the Bird of Prey. I just sold one this week. New York Finger Lakes is right after that, so you could do both of them together if you wanted. I just got 2 more people for Peggy's Cove as well. Orkin Coast is a little bit shy right now of people, but they're all out there. Please take a look at them on the website. ScottShieldsPhotoWorkshops.com. Okay, any questions? You're all still awake, right?